So what does it really take to build a strong, high-performing team?
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Well, to help explore that in more detail, we have a special guest today. Her name is Darcy Luoma. Now, you can check her out online at Darcy, and her last name is spelled Luoma.com. So Darcy Luoma, welcome to Fordify Live. We're live right now on multiple channels. Welcome, and tell our listeners a little bit about you and what do you know about teams?
Thank you so much, Ford. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been a big fan and following you for a long time. Yeah, I have been studying and working with teams for the last couple of decades, more than 548 industries. And what we find in most organizations is that many leaders are really good at hiring the right people and training them, getting them up to speed, and they're phenomenal at their expertise. But where they fall short is in taking it to the next level and training as a team. And of course, that when you can really invest in your team, you can supercharge your results. But that's oftentimes neglected.
Well, I know for me, years ago, I had a sporting goods company, had 140 employees, and I built it up to many millions of dollars in sales. Sales doesn't represent profit, just for the record there. And so I built the strong business, great revenue model, and I was having some turnover and dysfunction on my team. So I decided I needed team building, right? And so, I speak and train on business growth, not team building. And so I went and hired the renowned expert to come in and help me with team building. And so he came in and he met with me and he said, in order to build a strong team, Ford, I have to interview your leaders, your leadership, your board of directors, your managers. And then I want to do 360s with all your team members because I want to really make sure I understand. I want to diagnose before I prescribe. So he did that for 3 days, came back in the office and he said, Ford, I got news for you. You really have a messed up, he actually said something else, system. He said, you don't need team building. You need leadership training. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I know how to lead. And he said, well, your definition of leadership is delegating without details. And no one knows what success looks like. And then you send them off on a direction. And then when they come back, you complain that they didn't hit it. So you've got a really screwed up culture. So I had to step back and peel back the layers that before I could even talk about team building, I had to work from the top down and the bottom up on leadership. And then I was able to actually go, oh, am I hiring the right people? What does success looks like? What are the conditions of satisfaction? What are my minimum target and optimal settings? And I learned all these new things. So if you're listening to this today, we are talking about team building, but it's just one piece of the puzzle, assuming that you've already got great leadership in place and you've got a great, strong culture. So do you agree with that? What are your thoughts about that?
100%. And thank you for sharing and being vulnerable because you're not alone. I can't tell you how many times we get that phone call and it's usually, can you come and do a session on communication? We can. Tell me a little bit more about what's happening. And we'll say, we'll come in and do a session on communication, but it's not going to really move the needle, right? Because it's not focusing on behavior, mindset changes that are sustainable. In order to really create a high performing team, yeah, you have to have the leader who has that awareness, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, the ability to create clear expectations, to delegate, to have accountability. If you've got that in place, oftentimes the perspectives of the leader of what's needed for the team, when we do those individual interviews, we find that's just one perspective.
Right.
The team fills in the picture. And actually, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. The presenting problem is rarely the real problem.
Yeah, once you look below the surface, right? It's kind of like the iceberg. You see what's on the tip, but under the surface, there's a lot going on under the surface. With multi-generational teams right now, and in the economy, you hear about quiet quitting in cultures, and you hear all these different reasons why there's challenges. And there's such diversity in thought and in the makeup of a team with the different generations in the marketplace. Where do you start? I mean, I know for me, it's always a challenge, and I tend to try to hire people that are critical thinkers, that hire for attitude, train for skills. So I try to find, I think the first part of building a good team for me is really setting clear expectations of what does the job take, what are the characteristics for that position, and how am I going to measure success, and how am I going to hold them accountable. But then when I get a bunch of different age groups or different levels of experience, it becomes a real cluster.
Yeah. And so you're naming the challenges on a couple of lenses. Absolutely. When you think about different generations, there's also just different personalities, different styles
Right.
that come into the mix as well, different levels of expertise. So absolutely critical. Focus on leadership, making sure that the leader has the right training, the right skills, the right coaching, whatever it is. Then focus on making the right hires and investing in those individuals. You say, where do you start? Where do you go next? Then invest in training as a team. So what does that look like? Taking some time to design your team alliance and to say, okay, how do we want to be together? What kind of culture and atmosphere do we want to have? What helps you to thrive? What's your personal user manual, right? Really, okay, what are your operating instructions and what should we all know about you? How do we want to be together when things get difficult? Because it's not if there will be challenges,
That's
if
for sure.
there will be disagreement and conflict, it's when there will be. Because the highest performing teams have a lot of disagreement. They have a lot of conflict, but they do it in a way that doesn't shut people down, make them defensive. It doesn't bring contempt and stonewalling. They do it in a way that invites healthy debate, disagreement. So you can really debate internally and then defend externally once that decision is made.
Well, I believe that, training isn't something you did, it's something you do. I have worked with organizations before where I've been brought in to do certain types of training, and the team gets the training, but the leadership sometimes doesn't. So I'm a real big proponent of whatever the training is, now whether it's business growth or communication, culture, leadership, that you really have to get everybody involved on the same page. It's not just, that group over there needs this type of training, because if you don't get buy-in and everybody isn't on the same page, I've found that creates a lot of conflict.
Yes. And worse, it can create some resentment or defensiveness. What you're telling us to change, look in the mirror. And then the willingness to sort of really jump in and make those changes is hampered because of this sense of the others, the leaders, aren't also doing the work or taking a look at what's needed.
So let's have a tough conversation. Let's say you go into an organization and, you've been doing this for years. You've worked with hundreds of companies and you've worked around the globe in big companies and small companies, Darcy. So when you identify that it's the leadership, how do you I would say breach or broach, or how do you conduct that conversation to let the leader know, hey, you're really the problem?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I was coaching somebody, I'll call him Dan, and he said, Darcy, I just, I need to have you talk to the team because they are not being as innovative as I would need them to be. And we're doing strategic planning. And every time they bring up an idea or ask a question, I tell them why we've tried that before and why it won't work. And I need them to be more innovative and more creative.
Right.
And I say, okay, Dan, this is fascinating. If they're bringing up ideas and you're shutting them down and telling them why it won't work, there's a level of defensiveness that the team is feeling. And he says, I don't get defensive, Darcy. I don't get defensive. I'm just telling them why it won't work. And then, I work really hard to create some psychological safety, some real, just a safe environment with my clients so I can be very bold and direct. And I said, Dan, you're being defensive right now. And the light bulb went off. He didn't see that his perspective was that they need to change. They're not being innovative enough. And the reality was he had trained them to back off, because when they came up with ideas and he shut them down, they're like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to play this game anymore. This isn't fun.
Well, the more I've learned over the years, the more I know I don't know. In my early years, I've had 17 different companies. My first company was at 15 years old. And I had 3 crews working for me. Their average ages were 40 years old and above. And so I had a painting company. And what I learned over the time is I used to think, decades ago, well, my way is the right way. And I was really I'm very opinionated now. For those of people that know me, I'm very opinionated, but I'm also very open. I'm a critical thinker. I've trained for years and years to have an opinion based on some substance of fact, not just, the way the wind blows, but then also to be very open if someone comes up with a new idea. Like when I'm working with my team, I'll say, okay, we need to do this campaign and here are the different parts of the workflow and this is what we need to do. And I've trained my team to be my critical thinker, to say, hey, wait a second, you don't want to do that because that person just got an email last week or what, so I've conditioned them to do that. And it's really interesting because when I've had new team members, they're afraid to do that. And I've said, no, you have to be strong around me. You have to interrupt me. You have to tell me, but this is what I've had to create. Now, I do know that when I used to teach brainstorming years ago, I did a bunch of full day workshops on innovation and creativity, right? And you cover mind mapping and journaling and cloud thinking and everything with mind mapping and brainstorming. And I remember the rules of brainstorming. It really makes sense because when you do brainstorming, you want to make sure you have someone who is not the authority person at the front of the room. And it would be so interesting. I would watch these brainstorming sessions where someone says, okay, who's got an idea? And the person raises their hand. Well, I think we should do this. And just like what you said in your story, the leader says, oh, well, that would never work. And they start editing during the brainstorming. And it's so hard to convince a team to when they're doing these types of exercises, look, don't edit. Just capture the ideas and then, praise publicly, criticize privately, right? That's something I still have to learn. So I know my team will listen to this and like, hey, you said in that episode, well, yes, do as I say, not as I do, but we all want to work and get better. But I do agree that if that leaders don't even see that they might be subconsciously, they mean well, and they're trying to produce expertise, but if they're not encouraging a environment of open communication, then they're going to fail, and where they don't know what the problem is.
Absolutely. And just to take your example, you are highly opinionated. Great. You've got probably really good opinions, and your self-awareness and the work you've done as a leader is clear because you come to your team and you say, I'm not going to turn the volume down on my being opinionated. What I want to do is ask you guys to turn the volume up on pushing back, on poking holes, on challenging me. And when you as the leader are going to make a decision, it's people need to weigh in to buy in. And so to go to them and say, hey, here's what I want to do. I'd like your opinions. I want your ideas. And they weigh in. Now, you might, after hearing from the team members, say, oh, this is fascinating. I'm actually going to make a little bit different decision based on what I heard. So thank you for that. The decision, what you don't do is wait till there's consensus, because then you will be waiting forever and you will miss the windows of opportunity for growth, for innovation, for strategy. So you don't wait until there's consensus. But what you do is say, okay, I'm going to make this decision. Now, whatever the decision is, there's a number of you who don't agree with this. That's totally fine. What I need to know is, what do you need in order to get behind this decision? So if you can take that one extra step and make sure that they're articulating, because without that step, what they're doing afterwards is going and having the post-meeting meeting. Right. And saying, I don't know why Ford didn't, this is going to blow up. And in 3 weeks, he's going to come back. I've seen it again. If you can create an environment where they can say that in the room, name the elephant in the room instead of naming it after, you can raise the bar on the decisions that you're making, get everybody then to get behind the decision instead of sabotaging it afterwards.
So true. And I like to create an environment where I use the term North Star a lot. I'm sure that, maybe that's overused in some meetings, but I like to say, okay, what's our North Star? Let's not make it personal. It's not about me. It's, it's about business. And in business, the 5 ways to grow a business. Number 1, expand your influence. Number 2, how are you capturing subscribers and followers and email lists and things like that. Number 3, how do you get repeat and referral sales? So, how do you do that? You obviously want to increase the average transaction and do those things, and then improve operations. How do you improve operations so people effectively work better together? And it takes a lot of different modalities to grow. And it's important so whatever the problem is that we're solving in our company, or when I'm working with a client, is I want to make sure we've determined what does success look like? What is the North Star? What are we aiming at? Because then it doesn't become personal. It's not about my opinion versus your opinion or hurting my feelings. It's really, is this going to help us? And then what information are we using to justify our decisions? And sometimes it is our educated guess. Sometimes you do want to go with instinct, and sometimes you need to have a controlled test to see. Say, okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and test this. This is what we've all agreed in our consensus, what we're gonna do. Here's how long we're going to test it so that we know we're going to get maximum feedback. And it's just like when we do pay-per-click campaigns, people will say, well, how much should I spend on pay-per-click? It's like, well, what does it cost you to acquire a customer? You know, what's your profit on the first sale? What's your conversion rate? I mean, there's so many variables. It's the same thing with people and building teams. You know, what does success look like? What is their highest and best use of their time? How are you going to measure whether or not whatever you're working with as a team is successful? But team dynamics are so essential. I'm going to take the conversation in a little bit different. So you sent me a book, and so I'm going to put this book full screen on for everybody. So I've got Darcy's book. It's Thoughtfully Fit, and it's your training plan for life and business and success. It's signed by you. I've got some stickers and some other good stuff in here. Now, in full disclosure, I haven't read it yet because we just had this episode and it just came in the other day. But I want to say, tell us about this other area of your life, because I know you're a keynote speaker and you go into organizations and you help them create high performing teams. But tell me a little bit about this fitness and where all that came in.
Well, Thoughtfully Fit is our leadership model that we use when we're working with organizations and leaders and teams. And the premise is that if you want to, I've been an athlete my whole life. This spring, I'll be starting my 26th or 27th season of doing triathlons. I've lost track. And what I learned on my journey of fitness is that when I train and practice, I perform better. I get better results. I'm less likely to get injured. The same is true if you want to perform better in life and business. If you train and practice to be able to have that difficult conversation, to know how to give feedback. If you're edgy and you're like, oh, when I'm edgy and give feedback, it shuts people down. How do I give that feedback? How do you set boundaries? If you're a really compassionate person and you're saying yes to everything, how do you learn how to set boundaries? If you train and practice, you're going to get better results and fewer regrets. And so Thoughtfully Fit is our training plan. And how do you train and practice to be a more effective leader and to have a stronger team? And so Thoughtfully Fit is the book that outlines that model. And it does it through the lens of the story. I had spent a couple of years researching it based on all of the challenges that our clients would bring into our coaching conversations. So after 2 years of deep dive research, we identified what are the top obstacles that get in the way of being high performing, developed the model, and put it out into the world finalized it and put it in the world on a Saturday. And then 5 days later, my husband was arrested unexpectedly, shockingly. I was blindsided. And he was put in jail and ultimately never came home. He was a stay-at-home dad to our 2 young daughters. He was sentenced and convicted to 10 years in prison for sexual assault of a minor. And all of a sudden, I became ground zero to put this whole model into practice in my own life, because I now had more obstacles and challenges than I ever could have imagined. So the book outlines how I use the model in my own life, and then shares a lot of case studies about clients that we've worked with to be able to clear those hurdles that really, we don't control the hurdles and the obstacles. We just control how we respond to them.
Well, I know that whenever I have a challenge in my life, I'm so proud of just your resilience and your ability to just use the techniques and things you've learned and apply them in so many different ways. And that's why I love doing this podcast, because we bring new ideas to people, and not everybody has to agree. And it's not about agreeing. It's really, if we can be a catalyst for you to think differently and to act differently. And if you have a belief that isn't serving you, maybe it's time to get some new beliefs, right? There's no shortage of opportunities to be able to grow and expand. And so that's what I really like doing about this. And I know that for me, I have a support system of things I've learned over the years from mentors that when I first started on my journey to personal growth, I was a pro speed skater. I was an Olympic caliber speed skater. I went to the Olympic Training Center in 84 and 87. I never went to the Olympics, but I was at that caliber, so I will be very transparent there. I didn't go to the Olympics, so don't anybody give me any crap. But I was very strong. When I got out of speed skating, I went into cycling, and I became a pro cyclist. And in cycling, there's categories 1 through 5. I had points for Cat 2, but I stayed at Cat 3. So I raced in Cat 3 for years. And now I still do recreational racing. But when I started my sporting goods company for bicycles, I invented a bicycle rack that went from floor to ceiling. So you, Darcy, if you've been doing triathlons, you've probably seen those bike racks that are pole systems. I invented those in 1987 and patented it. And that was the company that I built up to 140 employees and $50 million in sales before I sold the company. But what's interesting is I was so focused on doing one thing. So when I was a speed skater, I speed skated. When I was a cyclist, I cyclist. So when I became an entrepreneur, I stopped training and I went from 168 to 268, added 100 pounds in about 5 years. And now I'm back down to around 250, but I really should be around 180, right? I mean, and so I don't have any excuses. I've got the best experts in the world I've had on my podcast. I've got fitness people. I'm married to a Pilates instructor who's in health and fitness. So I have no excuses. Okay. I control the damn fork. So I'm saying this because every time I do a podcast with someone who's in fitness, whether it's mental fitness or physical fitness, I always want to reaffirm myself that I take 100% responsibility for where I'm at. So I control the fork. I have to remember, am I exercising? Am I mindful? Am I sleeping? What type of food am I eating? Am I doing the things that I know I need to do? And I think it's like in business and in personal health, I think people really do know what to do. It's whether or not they really do it. I know in my keynotes, when I talk about local marketing, I go into a franchise brand when they really want their franchisees to dominate their local trade area. I tell them, I'll say, we're going to explore a lot of resources today, and I want you to follow your systems. And then I say, it's not what you know, it's how well you execute. And I think that really applies to whether it's team building or leadership. I think people at heart probably know what they should be doing, but if they're not doing it, it's because they're not executing on the basics, right? They're not training. And for you to do triathlons, I know how hard that can be. I'll just tell you a quick story and I'll turn it back to you for questions. So I was a pro cyclist and I'm racing, and my coach at the time, this is in the 80s, where triathlons were pretty much new. They were just coming on. And my coach said, "Hey, I want you to go do a triathlon." I said, "What the hell is a triathlon?" He said, "Well, you're going to swim, you're going to bike, and you're going to run." And I'm like, "Okay, great." He said, "Now you need to train." I said, "No, I'm good." Right. So I was a pro cyclist. So I get to the water. I sign up. We're at this place called Lake Afton, and it wasn't the full distance one. It was like a half a mile swim, 26-mile bike, and a 10K. So it wasn't really it was a short one, right? So I get to the water and I see all these women, and I'm not to be sexist, but my coach, it was like, "What do you feel?" I said, "Well, I'm going to beat all these people." Like, I was so cocky. I get in the water, and I kid you not, the women were coming back from the buoy before I was even 25% to the buoy. Like, well, they were from the Wichita swim team. They were doing it as a team. So they had all their swim. So I'm like, I almost gave up, right? So I get out of the water. I'm way behind everybody else. I get on the bicycle, and of course I'm a cyclist. So, 26 miles on a bike is basically a sprint. So I came in 4 miles ahead of anybody. 4 miles. So I came tied when they had people in cars talking on walkie-talkies where everybody was. I was 4 miles ahead of everybody. I came in almost last on the run. I didn't train for the run. I got off that bike. I ran the first mile and sat down. Then I walked about 25 feet, and then I walked. So I walked the whole 10K, and I never forget this because this guy, and I was in my 20s and I was in shape, right? This 65, 75-year-old man came by and said, "Hey, son, are you okay? Let's walk together." So here I was. I walked in with the old guy. No offense to the old guy. I'm 62 years old now. So at that time, it seemed old. But it was so funny because I didn't train for those two modalities. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't listen to my coach who said, hey, you need to be, you need to at least jog. And so I know as a triathlete yourself, you can relate to this ignorant person who signed up and did it. Now, since then, I've done a few triathlons and I've done them more for training, but I really respect the modality because it really takes much more training than, like, I can go out and do a bike ride. Now I do a lot of recreational rides. I'm signed up this year to do what's called Unbound, which is a gravel ride in Kansas.
Oh.
So anyway, that's my story and so now I want to get back in shape. So I got this and I'm like, well, I need to be thoughtfully fit first and then physically fit. So I can't wait to go through your book.
Well, and thank you for sharing. I love that story. And to just translate it back to what we were talking about with leadership, you might be really strong in one part of your leadership. You had talked about when you hired that consultant to come in, you had a vision, you had passion, you had drive. And what he helped you see is that what you needed to train for is how to work on some of those soft skills to make that environment for your team stronger. And so just like you were a strong cyclist, a pro cyclist, doesn't mean that those skills are transferable to the other areas. Obviously, in that case, swimming and running were challenging. It's the same way when you're a leader. Maybe you're really good at giving direct feedback, but you aren't good at giving appreciation and
I didn't even know what the word empathy meant, Darcy. I literally the expert I brought in, his name was Sam Silverstein, and he had a book called Accountability. He's in the National Speakers Association.
I love Sam.
So he came in 15 years, like this was probably 20 years ago when he first came in to work with me in my business. But it was so funny because he sat down with me and he said, look, your team doesn't need training, you do. And I'm like, Sam, BS, I'm like, I'm cussing and everything. I'm like, no, it's not me. He said, no, look, he said, let's do a personality assessment. So we do this personality assessment and, there's all different kinds. I think it wasn't Culture Index back then, but it was something about emotional intelligence and DISC, something like that. And we went through the assessment and my leadership score, my decision-making was real high. My empathy score was non-existent. Like, he's like, this is a problem. He said, my assessment actually said Ford believes in win-win situations, but if he can't get win-win, he's totally fine with win-lose.
Win.
And I'm like, that's not really, because, it's just like when anybody gets an assessment, they never want to really, when they're not a critical thinker, they don't want to believe that, hey, there could be something wrong. But that's when I really started to appreciate the other styles. And so right now, like, I've got a really strong marketing director. She's really strong, very opinionated, and sometimes we butt heads, but the outcomes are great. Same thing with my operations director and my executive assistant. I've surrounded myself with strong people, but they're integrators. They can actually get things done. Where I'm a visionary and I'm like, oh, let's do this, or let's do 3 podcast episodes in one day. It's like, I'm always the one that they have to rein back in.
Yeah. And when you were talking earlier about the 5 ways to grow a business, the skill set that you need on that team to grow, you need the visionary, but you also need somebody who can understand the systems and create the processes and the operations and the integrator. You need somebody who's focused on the results and they're the closer. They're going to get the sale. You also need somebody who's focused on the process and nurturing and making sure that empathy, that the clients feel good. What's the customer journey? So having a diverse team is critical for success, and having a diverse team is oftentimes what creates conflict, right? Like, oh, I can't believe Ford has 73 more ideas. We haven't even executed on the 13 from yesterday, and that conflict. So the team dynamics, being able to train as a team to say, we're all different. We're all unique. It's not about tolerating the differences. It's actually about leveraging them, about understanding and maximizing the differences.
Now, if you're listening or watching this right now on the screen, Darcy has a special gift for everybody listening today. It's Is Your Mind Fit for Success? And you can go to darcyluoma.com/thoughtfully-fit-quiz. So it's on the screen. If you're watching the live broadcast now, you'll see it. If you're listening to the podcast,
thing is just thoughtfullyfit.com. If somebody's driving and can't write it down, or you don't have paper, just go to thoughtfullyfit.com. It'll take you to the same place.
Well, there we go. I love short domains like that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And you also have a newsletter. So just go to Darcy's website, scroll down on her homepage. You can sign up for her newsletter to get Thoughtfully fit tips. So any closing comments you have for our guest today? We've talked about a lot of different things. What would you want to leave our listeners with, or some action steps, or whatever you want to talk about to close it? And then when I play the ending, stick around in the green room. So yeah, Darcy, perfect. I really appreciate you sharing this today. I'm glad to know you, and I've known of you, but having you on the show has been really insightful. And well, first of all, I have a couple questions as I ramble. Are you still exercising and competing?
Yes.
What's your training look like in a typical week?
So I'm on a triathlon team. I have a triathlon coach. I train 6 days a week. And we've got, well, right now I live in Madison, so it's, we're going to get a snowstorm tomorrow. It's insane. So we do 3 indoor bike training until we're outdoor. And then we've got a couple of run training sessions each week, and swim, and then open water swim in the summer. And I just took up a couple of years ago cyclocross. Last year, I took up mountain biking and doing off-road racing. I would love someday to do Unbound and the gravel race. I'm excited to connect with you offline to hear more about.
Yeah, now you're on Strava, I would assume, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, so I'll have to connect with you on Strava. And now, and you're indoor. What kind of indoor riding do you do? Do you have a certain type of trainer?
Yeah. I've got the Smart Trainer. What is it? I mean, it's.
Yeah, do you use it? Zwift? I always pronounce it wrong.
Yep, Zwift.
So I like to ride on Zwift. That helps. It helps keep me, because again, I'm an old CompuTrainer guy from the old days and used to ride rollers and watch VHS tapes and all those things. But now the only reason I went from road to gravel was because the cars are so I won't ride my road bike. I mean, I got a $10,000 really light carbon road bike. I don't even ride it anymore. It sits on my trainer. That's what I use my trainer for, because where I'm at in Kansas, there's so much gravel roads. I mean, I gravel ride everywhere, and the cars are better. Now, do you use a Garmin taillight or anything? Do you have radar?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it starts beeping and blinking when there's a car behind me, so that I don't have to worry or wonder.
Yeah, that's really good. I definitely like that. And what do you do for your nutrition? I'm just curious, because the problem was when in my 20s and 30s, I was training so much, it didn't matter what I ate. And then as I got older, it's like, oh, you can't just, I'm not training 40 hours a week. So what do you do for your nutrition? I'm just curious.
Well, so I don't eat any sugar, and I don't eat any grains, and no wheat or grains at all. So I don't eat any processed foods. I personally, I eat 3 pounds of fruits and vegetables a day, and protein and fat. And it fuels me better than I ever had. And that took me a long time to figure out.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I'm not doing 3 pounds of fruit and vegetables, but certainly, well, the fruit has some sugar, but I definitely cut all sugar out. I cut most salt out of everything too, just other than if it's in something, but I really try to do low salt. And then the protein and the fats I have more energy, and I feel better, and I sleep better on that. So I know that wasn't what this episode was about, but look, if you made it to this long in the podcast, congratulations on being here and making it to the end. So anyway, thank you so much, Darcy, for being a featured guest on Fordify Live.
Oh my gosh, it's so great. And I'm looking forward to continuing to deepen our connection. It sounds like there's so many things we have in common, and thanks for all that you do. And this podcast is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.